Roughly 10 feet above the neck, the sinister edge of a sharpened blade casts a shadow over a head of sable locks. A man is trapped under the guillotine, under the darkest, most fearsome shadow that could ever loom over one's very soul. He stares, bright green eyes empty and hollow when faced by the inevitable might of the shadow that lingers ahead. The green-eyed man cannot help but wonder how things came to this. A watching lady in the crowd asked what their lordship had done to deserve such humiliation, and a man scolded her, saying that she should watch her tongue or she'd be next. She should have seen enough to know what ruthless jerks ruled over them. The only thing that the common people could do in this situation was to keep their mouths shut and to stay out of the way. Now that war was upon them all across the continent, common folk like them had no choice but to stay as quiet as mice. Ravens and crows caught above the guillotine as many gathered to watch the eventual execution. It was a time of war and strife. Once the embers of bloodshed took hold of the entire eastern continent, the deadly conflagration simply refused to subside, leading to the hallowed noble house of Marbas to fall as the latest victim of this hellish conflict. The last heir stood kneeling before the people, trapped in the execution device as he waited for his death to come. So, fate exacts its heavy toll. The strong do as they wish while the weak steal to survive. Unlike the strong, the weak had to risk their lives with each passing day, hoping that they would not end up food for the birds. Unlike the strong, the weak had to dance with death itself in the end, one way or another. The gates of hell were the only place that the weak could await the sweet release of their demise. This was the infernal hellscape to which the continent had been reduced. The Lord of House Sylvester, a rival clan to House Marbas, Count Alan de Sylvester, sat with a cocky, disgusting grin on his face as he regarded his victory. The man called for the show to commence and murmuring rang through the crowd. The executioner, a young man who bore a strange and striking resemblance to the man who was supposed to die, was frozen on the spot, earning the disdain of the Lord of Sylvester. The wicked lord called again for the execution to begin. This time, the look-alike struggled forward, wobbling as he moved, hands tightening on the knife he held. The bound form of his victim was before him, and the man came to a stop beside the rope of the guillotine, hesitation thrumming through him. The Lord of Sylvester could barely hide his joy and asked for the boy to quickly cut the rope. Once again, the executioner trudged forward and loomed over the rope that held another's life. Slowly, the arms of the look-alike went up, the inevitability of the situation weighing heavy on his heart and on the hearts of those who watched. The Lord of Sylvester sat forward in anticipation as the rope was cut in a sharp slice. The dark truth was that the deadly sound of the sharp blade severing a person's neck was no different from the chop of a cleaver upon a butcher's block. The executioner stared in empty-eyed horror as drops of crimson blood found a macabre pale canvas on his face. The blood barely registered, and neither did the tears sliding down his face. All it did was lend the inescapable reality to the grim painting within the stench of iron. In fate's cruel fashion, this was the impossible burden that the young boy was charged to bear. To rid the world of Rune von Marbas. No, to cut all ties between the mortal realm and his own father. The blood pooling on the ground belonged to the one who had once sired him and held him safely in his arms. Indeed, the green boy with the empty eyes looked so much like the one who'd just died because they were related by blood. The boy was Leon von Marbas, the son of the late Rune von Marbas, and a kinslayer who served as his father's executioner. The patriarch. This was what one often called the Lord of the Noble House. As the term suggests, not only is the patriarch a member of the aristocracy, but he also comprises a core pillar of the nation. However, as a certain playwright once wrote, uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. The burden of power must only be granted to those who can bear it. Now, Leon sat at a table among a gathering of nobles. He was now the new Lord of House Marbas, and he watched as the nobles bickered amongst themselves angrily. Some were upset at how quickly House Sylvester was growing each day, and there was no telling when they might invade Marbas territory outright. A member in the seat of government said that it would be important for them to bolster their defenses, and they insisted that their patriarch make up his mind at once. They wanted to hear his sage answer. However, Leon just dismissed them. He told his government to remain patient just a little longer, and he was afraid that he needed more time to ponder. The others were, of course, not pleased to hear this, saying it was an urgent matter. The current situation boded ill for the once great house of Marbas. With the demise of his father, Lord Rune von Marbas, Leon von Marbas had risen to the seat of the patriarch of House Marbas at the tender age of 14. House Marbas was once feared as a powerful clan of necromancers, though that reputation had long since faded into the annals of history. The boy paused before the hanging portraits of his deceased parents. His mother and his father were no longer of this world, and he wondered what they would have him do in their stead. The boy knew that his plea would go unanswered, for the dead tell no tales and his parents could not offer wisdom from the great beyond. Nevertheless, the young heir was in sore need of guidance as to how he might restore glory and prosperity to his house. So, he kept walking till he came to a room with large wooden doors. The boy glanced at the portrait that hung above this one. The portrait of Wellen von Marbas, the founding progenitor of their house, and the sole necromancer of the continent in his time. It is said that their house first rose to prominence as the original Marbas patriarch made his name on the battlefield. However, ever since the heyday of their founding patriarch, their lineage had long since struggled to produce another full-fledged necromancer. This then led their family fortune down a path of decline. The young lad sighed. In the end, he had been made to take his own father's life, and he opened the door to his study, stepping inside. The boy strolled over to the table and dusted a copy of the chronicles of their family lineage. The founding Marbas patriarch, Wellan von Marbas, was a nigh mythical figure. With a wave of his hand, he would sweep away his foes like a lethal tempest, summoning waves of the undead in an unrelenting death march. By the time the eastern regions had been subjugated under his conquest, barely 2 months had passed in total. It was said that Wellan had struck a pact with the devil Marbas and unlocked one of the great mysteries of the continent, namely, the secrets of necromancy, using the dread tome Necronomicon. This then granted their founder the might that was needed to rule as sovereign of the continent. Now, the young leader was looking at the Necronomicon itself, a big black tome with an eye in the center of its cover. It was a priceless heirloom that had been passed down from their progenitor himself, and the very time that led to the rise of House Marbas as the sole family of necromancers on the continent. Of course, all those glory days are gone now. Leon casually flipped through the tome, but froze when a voice called out. The voice asked the young patriarch to listen closely. Leon was stunned and wondered where that voice was coming from. He wondered if a telepathic message had reached the patriarch's office despite the anti-magic field. Deciding to get right to it, the young lad asked who he was speaking to. The voice replied that Leon had no reason to be afraid and that it posed no threat to the lad or to his relatives. The young lord asked why he should trust such a bold statement, and a magic red circle appeared around him, overwhelming him with a bright flash of power. Leon managed to crack open his eyes and looked up in shock and surprise to see a great demonic beast standing before him. Shocked, the young lord asked where he was, and the demon hummed, asking if the family's predecessor had neglected to tell them of his existence. The boy was surprised, asking if the beast knew his father. The beast did indeed know his father, and he knew him by name. The creature sensed that the thread tying them together had been severed, so now he had come to Leon. The beast growled, saying that he had long fretted that Rune's nature was way too kind for the lord of a dark house. He should have known that Rune would meet an untimely demise. At any rate, he was not going to cry over it, and he approached Leon, asking who had dealt his father's dying blow. A very awkward conversation had come up, but the dead-eyed boy simply replied that the one to kill his father had been none other than the one standing before the beast. Leon von Marbas had been the one to take his own father's life. This provoked a roar of rage from the Marbas beast. The creature was surprisingly enraged, and he said that he would ask the boy one more time. With a dangerous snarl and an aura that bubbled with ferocious power, the beast asked if Leon was the one who slew his oath-bound contractor. Once again, the young, empty-eyed child replied that he had been the one to kill his father. The demon's eyes bubbled with red furious rage, and he lunged at the boy with a roar. The boy stared at the incoming beast, only a mild look of surprise on his face as he stared into the jaws of death. He could still recall the blood stains on his hands. It was like the demon was browsing through his memories. Marbas saw the fallen body of his former lord and the dead-eyed tears that the young boy had shed. Seeing the truth, the demon declared that Leon had been robbed of his senses. The hands that cut the rope had been his, but the child had not been the one to truly take his father's life. However, Leon insisted that this analysis was not the truth. The demon looked at the desolate boy, slight amusement on the great lion's face. The boy's despair aside, what truly eluded the demon's understanding was the abyssal aura that he could sense within the child. The all-consuming darkness lurked beneath the surface of the young lord's skin, and the demon could not help but wonder how such a young boy had come to be this depressed. A child should not harbor such a potent reserve of magical force. There was a ripple in the waters as the boy stepped forward, and looking closer, the demon could identify power bubbling underneath the boy's feet, red and malicious, with many bodies writhing within. The demon was shocked and thought that the sight he was currently witnessing was just plain absurd. The boy before him had the potential to perhaps even surpass his ancestor. Marbas cleared his throat for a moment and decided to introduce himself. He was Marbas, one of the 72 demons of hell, who turned his back upon the demonic realm and chose to exist alongside humankind instead. A lifelong friend of Wellan von Marbas and the source of the necromancy that became the unique art of House Marbas. The boy recognized the demon from the tales. When the progenitor founded House Marbas, the demon was the one who taught him the forbidden art of necromancy. Indeed, the great beast was the very same one that the boy mentioned. However, he was now bound to the Necronomicon, as he was a formidable demon once upon a time. Marbas the Black Lion, the founding patriarch, often said that necromancy was in the blood of the members of their noble house. However, Leon could not understand how it came to be that the great lion forsook them in the end. The boy's eyes burned with silent anger, and the demon was confused by his accusation. The lion asked why the boy would harbor such a notion, so Leon explained. Ever since the time of their progenitor, Lord Wellan, House Marbas has not been able to produce a necromancer of his caliber. This was certainly a sign then that the lion of their family had abandoned them. The lion listened to the boy's words, paying rapid attention, and then he decided to make one thing clear. The reason why the noble family had been unable to wield the true might of a necromancer was that they were too weak to offer a fitting vessel. The boy was confused and asked more about this vessel thing. Not a single member of the House of Marbas could hold a candle to the sheer talent that Wellan possessed. This was but an omen of their bloodline's decline. Leon was silent as he considered this answer to his question. Then, he decided to take the lion's word for it, and the demon acknowledged that the boy was quick to accept the truth. Of course, for the weak to suffer defeat in times of war was merely an unchanging law of the universe. The lion wondered aloud if this was how the boy had come to terms with the death of his father. The boy said that it made no difference. In all honesty, there was nothing special about his father's passing, and that said, unless the demon had completely turned his back on their house, the boy had a favor to ask of the Lord Marbas. The great lion was curious about this favor, and he decided that he would do no such thing. A favor was an act of kindness in which one possibly stands to make a loss. The boy would refer to any dealings with a demon as a pact or a deal. So, the young patriarch accepted a pact for the power of necromancy. The two locked eyes and Leon asked if it was within the lion's means to grant that power to him. The great demon scoffed with his head in the air, saying that a mere boy had no business questioning his means. Besides, he wondered what exactly he had seen of the boy to make him bestow him with his power. Did the boy really believe that he had the potential worthy to wield his powerful necromancy? Without missing a beat, the boy said that he did have the potential, and had he been some talentless peon, he would never have been permitted to exchange words with such a lofty demon after all. It was said that ordinary folk needed only to simply converse with a demon before they were robbed of all mana, suffered hallucinations, and ultimately lost their lives once the demon was done with them. Considering that the boy remained standing for now, it could only mean that he was worth at least trying out. He would have some modicum of potential. The beast could not fault the young lad's logic, as he himself could see that the boy had talent and grit. Well, Marbas said that any request of a demon would be a pact, and it was important to remember that. The boy said that it was not foolish to believe that he may have something to offer in return. The demon stared at the boy for a moment before he just burst out into mad laughter. There was no way this child could possibly offer anything of significance to the great beast. However, he was amused by the offer. Intrigued, the lion said that he would make a pact with the young lord of the Necromancer's bloodline. Then, Leon asked what price the demon would demand of him, and the great beast grinned maliciously. With a wicked smile, Marbas made it known that his price would be every facet of Leon's being. The empty-eyed lord stared long and hard at his family heirloom, and smiled just as wickedly as he said that this was a relief to hear, for he would gladly surrender every part of his meager existence. It was a great relief to hear, as Leon would happily surrender every part of this meager existence, and the lion flinched for a moment to see such a wicked smile on such a young lad. Meanwhile, back in the council room, the nobles were gathered and they sat in silence. Finally, the old man spoke up, saying that as most of the gentlemen were aware, their current patriarch, Leon von Marbas, commanded very little authority to make decisions of grave import that affected the entire house. Though dressed well, the old man had clearly brought some gutter behavior in with him through the door, and he asked if the other members of the Marbas council were in agreement. As they didn't protest, he took that as agreement and continued. As such, in the old man's capacity as the uncle and closest kin of the current patriarch, he planned to take charge of all matters concerning their house for the foreseeable future. The boy had stepped out for just a few minutes, and his council was already plotting to backstab him. Now, the uncle said that he would allow the rest of the council to speak their minds regarding his appointment as steward of the house. One of the other nobles said that they would be foolish to disapprove, given that the alternative was a mere pup who had not even come of age to inherit the house, or anything in particular. So, the man with the slicked back hair voted for the uncle to take over, saying that they could not leave these crucial decisions to an unworthy child. He believed there was no better fit to take over the matters of the house than the uncle, Sir Kirchhoff. Be that as it may, the mustached noble opposed the motion. Lord Leon was the only direct lineal descendant of the previous patriarch. There was no precedent in their family history for appointing the next patriarch in violation of direct lineage. However, the other man argued that precedent would not help them if their entire lineage got wiped out. He made a very forceful argument. The armies of those Sylvester brigands were marching against them at that very moment. Slicked hair could not fault Mustache for hesitating and raising concerns regarding proper birthright, and whatnot, but they had to know that voting against the uncle was choosing to perish with the clueless young lordling. Slicked hair, on the other hand, would tend to his own survival first. Mustache slammed his hand on the table, accusing the other noble of speaking out of turn. Every last one of them was granted a place at this table by the grace of the late lord. They owed it to him into this house to fight to the very last, not bicker like a bunch of jackals. Even if the sitting patriarch was yet to gather his own faction, Mustache would not stand by and watch his uncle usurp his rightful place as heir. The uncle was a wicked, domineering presence, almost as leery and as unforgivable as the man who'd killed the late lord, and Mustache hoped for guidance from Rune's spirit. It was very unfortunate that their good lord had left them in the clutches of this shameless vulture. The uncle chuckled, saying that it was a bold yet amusing opinion indeed. Leon von Marbas, their current patriarch, had at least one loyal vassal, it seemed. Mustache asked the uncle to speak plainly, as he had no time for games. As loyal as Mustache may be, he lacked any kind of shrewdness that seemed to be required in politics. The uncle, on the other hand, had way too much shrewdness, and he could see that the matter was already a done deal. No other noble at the table had opposed the situation, and Mustache stood with worry on his face. Pullen, his name was, and he was a dear old fellow, so the uncle told the man to take his sage counsel and to let the matter drop. After all, the uncle had gathered them all today, and it was not because he had any regard for Pullen's opinions whatsoever. The mustache man would not be bullied, and he cursed, realizing that this situation was by the wicked uncle's design. Herschel told the plump man to consider his next words carefully for the sake of his family, if nothing else. The mustache man stiffened as he was reminded that they had all gathered for one purpose alone, to make an unsavory choice that would nonetheless be the least of all evils for the house. The plump had no need to stand in the way of their survival, and all they asked was for him to let their wisdom take its course. The mustache man was beginning to realize that he was merely a pawn in the uncle's game from the very beginning. The man begged the old lord's spirit to forgive and have mercy on a pitiful vassal who failed to protect his legacy. While all this was going on, Leon was busy gaining some fancy new demonic powers. He stood before the great demon Marbas, and the lion hummed, noting that all was well, except for one thing. With the change in the subject of the pact, the true extent of the lion's power had been curtailed. As soft and naive as his father Rune was, as Marbas' contractor, the man had possessed a far greater mana reserve than his son had currently. Come to think of it, the boy did seem to recall that any demon who made a pact with a human had to draw magic energy from their contractor to replenish their own reserve. The boy then wanted to know what he had to do in that regard, and he wanted to get the process done sooner rather than later. The great lion mentioned that there was precious little that the boy could do as he was now. However, they ought to be sparring with his mana for now. With a snap of his fingers, the big book opened, and the great lion took on a more manageable form to work with the amount of mana that the boy currently had. He now appeared much like the world's fluffiest black kitten. This form should be less burdensome to maintain. Leon was not discouraged, and he figured that this made sense. The creature was certainly adorable enough to pass as a pet. The boy barely got far with his compliment before Marbas' demon shadow burned with his true form, as he threatened the boy to never dare call him adorable again. He might be small now, but he swore to make a maze of bite and claw marks all over his contractor's face. Leon was not very deterred by that threat, but for the sake of getting what he wanted, he went with it. The fluffy kitten huffed, saying that now that they were in accord, it was time for them to depart. The boy was surprised and asked where they would be going. Obviously, the young lord wished to obtain strength that would rival even his progenitor, and he did remember asking for that. If he was to stand any chance of ascending to the same heights that he did, then what better way to follow in his footsteps than to literally retrace his footsteps? It sounded good enough to the young lord, so it was time for them to journey to the hidden shrine of his progenitor. He was completely oblivious to his noble seat getting snatched right from under him. The perils of the journey they were about to take could claim his life, and Marbas asked if Leon still wanted to proceed. Of course he did. The boy couldn't care less about staying alive, and he did not get why his resolve kept getting questioned. The kitten was rather proud of him and began to lead the way, telling the young contractor to keep up if he could. So, the young lad followed, and the two proceeded into the nearby forest. The lad recognized the mistwoods of the house Marbas. The forest could be an inscrutable labyrinth for those who were not of his bloodline. Then the boy recalled that his father had told him that only the rightful patriarch may set foot inside the secret shrine itself. However, the boy did find it odd that the place was supposed to grant his predecessors the power of necromancy, but it had failed to do just that. The kitten explained that none of the predecessors had passed the trial, and they had likely been found lacking when it came to the most fundamental requirement of all. Only those who possessed the purest shade of black, the element of the abyss, could clear a path to the shrine. No one to date had been able to satisfy this first condition to make it through the dense bubbling and magic purple fog. The boy could see that it seemed evident enough. Marbas raised a paw, and the fog cleared to reveal a door. Without further ado, the kitten smiled, eager to begin the first trial. Wind whooshed inside the place, and Leon was granted the permission to enter as a descendant. The boy stepped forward, taking in the bricks covered in moss. The boy was warned, of course, that he would no longer have the demon's aid. The boy accepted this as the kitten had mentioned that it was going to be a test after all. The cat grinned as said that he did have one piece of counsel to offer. The boy was to follow the Necronomican's instructions at all times. It would lead the boy on the path toward his reward, the power of necromancy. It was dark at the bottom of the stairs, but there was sufficient lighting with lamps in the glowing necromancy book. Leon paused when he suddenly heard a screech in the dark, and he turned to look down the dark corridor. One of the lamps lit with a green light, and a bunch of green, bulky and muscular people appeared in the dark. The boy stared down and saw beside him a girl tied up before the creatures that seemed to be goblins. With barely any reaction to the situation around him, the boy grabbed his purple book and opened up a few pages. He found the guide on how to utilize the maximum potential of the divine relic, the Necronomicon. The first secret was reanimating the dead. The boy stared at the book in silence for a moment, and he looked at the empty hallways and the goblins that were now charging at him. There did not seem to be any dead to raise, so the boy looked back at the book that said he had to begin by taking a life. Well, he'd already done that once before, so Leon closed the book and picked up his dagger, his eyes shining with the fiery determination of a killer. He took note of the bound bodacious stranger in ripped clothes. Obviously, goblin entertainment, and the goblins growled to see him ogling their prize. The young patriarch stepped forward, knife in hand, and then there was an explosion as one of the goblins leapt into the air, screaming murder. The boy was unfazed as the goblin approached, dodging the creature's first blow. Then he swung his knife, slicing the charging creature before him. It seems the boy had taken some time after patricide to practice his murder a bit. Blood poured from the fallen goblin, and the boy turned, eyes glowing with death, to see who was next. Alright, so that was a pretty thrilling start to a brand new series that I really look forward to covering more of. If you guys enjoyed this story, please be sure to let me know in the comments below, and I'll make sure to prioritize it accordingly. More content coming soon, so if you're new to the channel, definitely consider subscribing to stay updated on future uploads. Until next time.